So my hope with this video is to kind of show you guys how you can plan and build the basic structure of your app. So at this point, you guys know everything that you need to know to build an app for the AP performance task. So what I'm going to give you is kind of this, planning guide that kind of gives you step-by-step questions that you can ask yourself to guide you through building your app. I'm also giving you a link in Canvas to, I'm calling this the golden structure. You can call it whatever you want. But this kind of lays out, just using comments, what you need to do in different parts, right? So the idea is there's two parts to building your app, right? Well, first, you have to come up with a topic, whatever your topic's going to be. Once you know that topic, there's two things you need to do. One of them is you need to build the structure for your app. That structure is going to be, 90% of it's going to be the same no matter what topic you choose. So you're going to have to create variables. You're going to have a list. You will need to have an on event that's going to listen for the user to do something, that's going to call your function, and then you're going to define your function. Right? That's kind of the basic structure. You need to have this no matter what topic you're doing or no matter what pattern you're going to implement. What changes is what goes inside your function and maybe a little bit of the code outside of your function. We call this your do something. That's the second part, right? We have the basic structure where you create variables, you have an on event, you call a function, you define a function. The second part is your do something. That is driven by your pattern. So for this video, I'm going to build an app using this planning guide, this structure, and I'm going to use this multi-list filter pattern. And this kind of tells me what my do something is. So there's going to be some code I'm going to have to add, outside my function. This will pretty much tell me what my function needs to have because this becomes my algorithm. So the do something is really going to be what you fill in here to create this algorithm, because you'll notice this has to have sequencing, which is 2 or more lines of code, selection, which is an if statement, and iteration, which is a for loop. So if I look at this pattern, when I implement these lines of code, it's giving me more than 2 lines of code, it's giving me a loop, it's giving me an if statement. That is my algorithm. So kind of the combination of that structure with your do something based off your pattern creates your app for you. So for this app, we are going to, I'm just going to call it the Netflix app. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the user choose a genre from a drop-down, and then I'm going to show them a list of movies that match that genre. So the first thing I need to do is kind of build out my UI. I'm going to keep this super simple. I'm just going to call this user drop-down because I want them to select a genre from a drop-down. I'm going to put a single button out there. I'm just going to call it button submit. And then I need a text area that I'm going to show them their output to. All right, so I'll just call this, output area. All right, and that's my user interface. I don't need to do anything more than that. So what I'm ready to do is kind of build some code. So I'm going to go to this planning guide. And it says, ask yourself, what list do you need for your app? Each list you will need to use a single data set in code.org, and then for each list, create a variable to store the list using getColumn. Right? So I am using the Netflix data set. So I've already imported it here. Let me pretend like I didn't. If you go to search, all right, I'm using Netflix, so I'm going to import this Netflix. And what I can see, I know I need the genre because that's what I'm going to ask the user for. So I'm going to have to loop through this list and see all the movies that match the genre that they selected. And then my goal was to return any movie or any TV show that matches that genre. So I'm going to need the genre column. That's going to be one list. I'm also going to need the title. So I'm going to use this to filter. I'm going to use this to display. So all this is telling me to do is create a variable for each one of those lists that I need. In my case, it's genre and title. Store it to a variable and use getColumn to get the list. So this should kind of be review for you. I'm going to go to my code. I'm going to go to variables. I'm creating 2 lists. right? So this one is going to be called title. I'm going to call it titles. This one is going to be genres. And then I'm going to use get column for each one. All right, so I've already imported my Netflix content. This is my titles one, so I'm going to choose the title column, so that's my first list. Then again, I'm going to choose Netflix. All right, and this is my genre, so I'm going to choose genre. All right, that finishes this first step. All right, I've created two lists. So now, for each event you plan to listen for from the user, create an on event. My suggestion is to have a single button in your app that the user will click once they have completed any text input or drop-down selection. All right, so all this is telling me to do is now that I've created my list, I'm going to create an on event. All right, I'm following my own advice, so whenever this button submit is clicked, I'm going to do something inside of here. So if I continue reading, ask yourself what inputs you will need to get from the user. You will need at least one input from the user, but you may need more. In my case, I am just getting one input from the user. It is this user dropdown. So I am only using one input from the user. And it says for each input you plan to use from the user, create a variable to store the user's input values using get text or get number. So all that is telling me to do is now inside my on event, I'm going to create this variable. I'm going to call it user genre. And what I'm going to do is use get text because they're going to select something from this user dropdown. So I want to use the user dropdown. So whatever they choose, I'm going to get this text and I'm going to store it to user genre. Right, now, if you're using drop-downs, like you may or may not have to do this, I need to put some genres in my drop-down. So what I'm going to do, looking at these genres, I can see there is a whole bunch of genres in here, right? I only want to use a couple of them because this is just a sample app. So I'm going to use stand-up comedy. So I'm going to need to put that in exactly as it's typed there. Right? If you're having the user type something in, you don't need to do this. But in my case, I do. I'm going to use horror movies. And then I'm going to use thrillers. And then I'm going to use, let's see, we'll do comedies. All right, so before I go any further, I'm going to go to my design mode, click on this. All I need to do is build out these options, right? So I said I was going to do stand up comedy. I'm going to do horror movies. I'm going to do thrillers. And I'm going to do comedies. All right, again, these need to be typed exactly as they show in our genres list. So the only one I'm not 100% sure about is stand-up comedy, so I'm just going to verify that I wrote that correctly. And I can see that I did stand-up comedy. All right. So I have now finished through this part, right? For each input you plan to use, create a variable, use get input, or sorry, get text or get number. So now what I want to do is call your function. Use the user input variables you just created as the arguments for your function call. So again, I'm just building out the structure, so I'm going to use my function, right? I'm just going to call this update screen because that's what you guys are used to. But you'll notice here it says use the user input variables you just created as the arguments for your function. All that is saying is here, I created this user genre to store the genre. That's what's going to become my argument. Right, so I'm going to call update screen and I'm going to pass in user genre. So now I need to define my function. Make sure you have a parameter for each argument you passed in. To put it simply, if you are getting two inputs from the user, then in step 2bi, which is up here, you would have created two different variables to store the user input. You would have then passed those two variables as the arguments in function call 2b2. So what it's basically saying is like, if you created two inputs for the user, I would have created two variables here and would have passed two variables in here. I only did one, right? So I just need to define my function, which should be update screen. Right? And then because I passed in only one, I only need to create one parameter here. I'm going to call this genre. Right? So here's my argument, here is my parameter. You have to have these for your app at this point, but that gets me through all the way through 3. Right? I created my list, I created my on event. Inside my on event, I did two things. I created an input for each user input, I created a variable to store each user input that I plan to get, and then I called my function using an argument. And then I defined my function. Right? So I'm off to a pretty good start here. And if you're looking at this golden structure, it kind of matches, right? Create your list. You will most likely be doing this in a data set. You would get column. I created my on event. I updated any variables that I needed. And then I called my function using an argument, and I've defined my function. So this is kind of using these comments. I'll let you kind of do this on your own, rewatching this video. I followed these steps. I've implemented all of these parts here. All right, so you can see the structure is not a lot of code. What I need to do now is implement my pattern. Right. The reason I know that this is a multi-list filter pattern is because I created two lists up here. If I only created one list, then I would be doing the single list filter pattern, right? Which is, I believe up here, there's a starting letter pattern to filter a single one. There's a length pattern to filter a single one. If you're doing multiple lists, it's this one. So what I need to do is implement this pattern. And I can kind of follow this to help me, right? So up here, they're creating list, right? And if I look at my app, I've already created lists, so I don't need to worry about that. Here, they're creating filtered empty versions of my list. So there's a student name list here. They created a filtered student name. Student grade list, there's an empty filtered student grade list. Student age list, there's a filtered student age list. And I'll notice each one of them is being created as an empty string. So as part of my pattern, I need to do this, and this is being done outside my function. So this is where you have to kind of go back in and add the parts for your particular pattern. So outside my function, outside my on event, I'm going to create, this one's called titles, so I'm going to create a filtered titles. This one is genre, so I'm going to create filtered genres. Right, and I'm just going to make them an empty list to start, so I'm going to use the open and close square bracket. So now I have this, I have this. What I need to do is start building out my algorithm inside my function. So the first thing I see is that they've actually, this list that I created here, filtered student names list, it's being listed here. The student grades list, right? And then the student age list. What is different is I created these here, so I used the var keyword. I can see they are not using var in here. And all they're doing is making sure that those lists are empty. So I need to make sure that that is part of my app. So again, I'm not going to use the var. I'm just going to make sure that each one of my lists is empty before I start filtering. So again, I only have two. So it's one was filtered titles, and one was filtered genres. All right, and then each one is an empty list. All right, and you might be asking, why do I need these? The idea is, before I filter a list, I need to make sure that anything I previously filtered has been deleted. So the idea is I'm starting off with all the titles and all the genres. I want to get a filtered list that has only the titles that match the genre the user told me. So if I run this the first time and I select comedies, It's going to find all the comedies in titles and genres, and it's going to only put those to my filtered titles and filtered genres. So these filtered titles and filtered genres is going to be a condensed, reduced version of my original list that has been filtered. If the user then goes in and selects a different genre, if I don't get rid of all of the comedies that were in there from my first filter, I'm going to end up with a filtered list that has maybe stand-up comedy and comedies. I don't want that. So I'm going to make sure the list is empty before I run it a second time. So if I filter for comedies and then I choose stand-up comedy and hit filter again, these two lines are going to delete all the comedies before I go in and add the stand-up comedies. So these lines are very important, and it's extremely important that you do not put the var keyword in front of them. So kind of moving on, I've got my list. I've created my filtered lists that are empty. I'm making sure they're empty before I start my loop. So I can see now I need to put a loop with an if statement. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to add my loop, and then I'm going to add my if statement. And I can see what they're doing is they're filtering one of my, or sorry, they're looping through one of my original lists. So they chose student grade list, right? It's really important that you use one of your original list for your loop, not a filtered list, because we need to loop through every single student in this case, or in my case, every single title that's in Netflix to find the ones that match my filter. So it does not matter which one of these three original lists you choose. For me, because I'm kind of filtering by genres, I'm going to say as long as I is less than genres.length. But again, I could have chosen titles. It doesn't matter. What I'm going to do now is I can see there's an if statement. So what this is checking is, does what the user gave me match that element in my list? So what I'm going to check is if genres at index I, if that matches genre. Right? The idea here is when they click the button, they chose a genre. So I'm getting that genre and I'm storing it to user genre. I am then passing that into my function. This is my argument. So I've called my function using my argument, which is the variable that contains the genre the user chose. So in my function, I created my parameter. This is my placeholder genre. So I'm using genre here to see if the genre the user typed in matches any of the elements in my genre. So what I need to do now is append. So I have two filtered lists in mind, so I'm going to have two append items. So I'm going to go to append item. I need two of them. Right? I know I need two because I have two filtered, so I'm going to have to append twice. So this one I'm going to append to filtered titles. And what I want to append is the value for that title at that element in my loop. So it's going to be titles at index I. This is going to be filtered genres. And again, it's going to be from my original list, genres at index I. Right? And what's kind of important is to understand where I'm using the original list and where I'm using the filtered list. So here's my original list. I use them for my loop. And I use them to append to my filtered list, right? Everything else is using my filtered list. And you can see that pretty much finishes up my pattern. Right? So if I'm coming back over here, it says make sure you have a parameter for each argument you passed in. This is where the work comes in. You now need to implement your pattern. That's what I just did. So I made sure I implemented my pattern and I got my sequencing, selection, and iteration. So I'm now down here. Once you have completed the steps above and fully implemented your pattern, now you just need to add code to display the outputs to the user of your app. And you need at least two outputs. So this is the way I do it. What I do is I'm going to add an if-else statement after my for loop. Right? It's really important that it's after your for loop. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my filtered titles And what I want to do is say if filtered titles dot length, if that's greater than 0. Right, and the idea here is I've done all this work to loop through every single genre I have, check to see if that genre matches any of the genres in my list, and if it does, I've added it to filtered titles. So if the length of filtered titles is greater than 0, right, that means it's 1 or greater. That means that at some point I found at least one match. So I found results. There is at least one element in my filtered titles, which means I can display something to the user because I found a match. If this is false, meaning this filtered titles.length is not greater than 0, then I'm going to output text to tell the user I didn't find anything. So the easiest way to do this is to say if you're whatever your filtered whatever dot length, if it's greater than 0, I'm going to keep this simple to start. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say, okay, the output area, I'm just going to say if the length of my filtered list is not greater than 0, meaning I did not find anything, no results found. Now, if I did find something, then I want to display that to the user. There's a couple different ways you can do this. I'm going to use the dot join. Right, so what I'm going to say is my filtered titles dot join, and I want to do a new line break between each one. All right, so what this should do for all the titles that it found, it's going to loop through. Join is the method that we can use to turn a list into a string, and for each element it's going to add a line break after that element. So you guys have played with this in some of the lessons. If you don't know what dot join is, don't use it. This is just how I'm doing it. But let's kind of run this and see if it works. So if I choose thrillers, all right, so I can see these are all of the thriller movies and TV shows that are in the list. If I chose comedies, all right, it's going to update and show all the comedies. If I chose stand-up comedy, right, it's going to update and show all the different stand-up comedies. Right, so that's it. Here's all the horror movies. Right. If you wanted to see the no results found, what I could do is go into design mode. I'm just going to add another one here that's test. I know test does not match any of my genres. So if I run this now, say horror movies, it finds the horror movies. If I say test, it says no results found. All right? And that's really it. I mean, this would work perfect for a performance task on the College Board. For Unit 7, it would work perfect for your midterm. So obviously I'm going to tell you you cannot use this for Unit 7 for the performance task for your midterm, but you can use the multi-list filter pattern. This video kind of walks you through it. If you want to do a different pattern, again, you're using the same structure. So you're still going to follow all of these steps. It's just going to change your do something, right? This part right here is going to change based off whatever pattern you decide to use, but they give you that pattern. Right? I built the structure, and then I implemented the pattern. So if you have questions on this, you can always come and see me. I strongly suggest you watch this a few times, kind of use these documents to guide you through creating your app. All right.